know if you would introduce yourself.
Yeah, so I'm Krux. I'm the president of SynShop. Basically, been the president since it started pretty much.
And what kinds of things are your forte? What's your passion?
I do a bit of everything. So electronics, woodworking, metalworking, welding. I've even done like knitting and sewing and that type of thing. I basically collect skills, so mile wide, but an inch deep type of thing. I'm also a network engineer, so I do computer stuff, networking. I mean, if it says Cisco on the side of it, I probably mess with it.
Is there anything that you've done that you're particularly proud of?
I like the high voltage projects I do, so like my Tesla coil, my ring launcher, and things like that. So that's one of the specialty, I guess, build things that I do versus other people.
All right, and where did you learn to do that kind of stuff?
So that's an interesting story. I grew up in Michigan, and so me and a friend of mine had gotten a hold of an old neon sign transformer, and so we were like screwing around in the basement and making Jacob's ladders, and like weren't getting that great of a spark out of it, and so I did some research, and at the time for research you had to go to a library because the internet wasn't a thing yet, and I figured out that if you can make a glass capacitor, then that will increase the power output. So I had a loosely stacked pile of like pane glass and pieces of like aluminum or tin or whatever metal we happen to have, all kind of just piled up. And it worked really well until it self-destructed, and then it was really entertaining. So that's kind of how I got my start. And now I'm a bit more cautious on safety, because high voltage, if it bites you, you don't get a second chance sometimes. So.
All right, so if you were to encounter a younger person looking to get into the things that you did or do, where would you recommend they start? What kind of skills do they need? Where can they look to learn? Any tips you can offer?
So it all depends on like what area they're looking into. I mean, electronics is a huge field. I mean, so you can get into like Arduinos and that type of thing. That's like an easy way to get started. There's tons of resources online for that and a huge community for it. So, that's probably a great place to get started with like robotics or learning to program or any number of things there. High voltage, that is a different field entirely. Getting started with that, then you're looking at messing with like neon sign transformers are a relatively safe way to get started with it. They're current limited, so if you do get bit, you'll probably be okay. Other things, if you get bit, like the ring launcher I built, there's no second chances on that, because it's a microwave oven transformer, and those things are incredibly dangerous. Do lots of research before you do things on high voltage, and especially pay attention to like what things you have to do for safety. You don't want to ever create a circuit path that goes across your heart, because that's what kills you. There's Tesla coil main list is a great one for high voltage stuff. Other things electronics related, I mean, there's I started on the Forrest Mims books that you could get from Radio Shack back in the day. So that teaches you a lot of the basic analog stuff, and dealing with like op amps and timers and stuff like that. That's a great way to get started too. Radio Shack's not really the thing it was before, but you can still find that information online. My uncle was in the electronics as well, so that's kind of how I got a lot of my start, is building like crystal radio sets and stuff like that.
All right, and The question I like to ask a lot of people is, how do you define maker? Who is a maker?
So I mean, I personally prefer the term hacker. uh, that's why I always refer to CineShop as a hacker space, not a maker space. It is both. They're both the same thing. Hacker is a thing that has a lot of different meanings, and unfortunately, with the media, they tend to hype on the evil bad guy definition hacker versus the original definition of hacker is someone that basically tinkers with things and likes to learn how they work. So you have a thing and you want to learn about the thing and try to make the thing do something that it wasn't originally intended. Hackers and makers are creative types, so they tend to think outside of the box sometimes. If we're using a generic term that gets thrown around a lot, it's problem solving and thinking about things that maybe not everyone thinks about. Where someone sees a phone and you say, oh yeah, well I can surf the internet and maybe talk to people. I guess people use phones for that sometimes. And a hacker will say, well, it's running this software. How can I, get around stuff on the phone and make the phone do things other things?
Oh, sorry.
That answer your question?
I guess so. And as I go to other spaces and talk with other people, are there any things you're curious to hear about from other spaces and how they do things?
So I always ask about how they run the space, what problems they run into with the space, because that's useful information when you're working with building spaces, because you always have certain issues. So like, how do you deal with problem members? How do you deal with getting people to clean up? How do you deal with getting money? Basically, the running the business of a hackerspace is something that talking to other spaces is really useful. So.